Good morning, everyone. This is Mariana Pardo. I'm the director of the HUBZone program, and I'm very glad that you are investing your time in attending this conference. We are going to basically gear to talking about the program as it relates to the communities, obviously. And we're going to take that perspective from the perspective of that economic development organization. And so the areas that we're going to be covering today are going to be kind of like talking about the purpose of the program in general, and why would a firm be obtaining the HUBZone certification? Why, as a economic development individual, in the area wherever you're working, why would you be encouraging firms to look into this program? And why incorporate it into the economic development strategies? The other aspects that we're going to be talking, obviously, are how to get the certification and keep it, and also when and how the HUBZone geographical designations are made, how they're made, when they're made, how they're updated, how often they change. Just general information so that you know particularly what, where to find additional data too. So the purpose of the program is actually, it began in the late 90s. It was, I think the first firm was certified in 1988. And the term HUBZone, that word HUBZone, is actually an acronym that stands for Historically Underutilized Business Zones. And as the name connotes, it's actually, they're areas that have been impoverished for many, many decades. Generations have lived in these areas with very little opportunities, economic opportunities for jobs, et cetera. So the purpose of the program is to increase employment opportunities. Obviously, that particular purpose connects with one of the regulatory requirements, because one of the regulatory requirements, which we'll talk in a little bit, is that the employees, the firm needs to employ at least 35%. That is just the minimum. At least 35% of their workforce have to reside in a HUBZone. So obviously that is aligned with the purpose of the program to increase economic opportunities. Now that also means that someone could move into these areas. Obviously, people that are already living there, but folks that are moving into this area are also considered to be HUBZone residents. So we can talk a little bit more about that, and obviously if you have questions throughout, just we will be answering towards the tail end. The other purpose, obviously, is to stimulate the capital investment in these areas. And the industry, the small businesses, are expected to invest, whether it is purchasing a building, whether it is refurbishing an otherwise abandoned warehouse, for example. So they are expected to make those investments because that is why the program was established, to encourage these industries to come back to these areas or to set up operations in these areas and occupy buildings that have been abandoned for many years. This particular capital investment is actually connects with another regulatory requirement, which is the principal office requirement. And as we will learn later on, the principal office is defined in the regulations as the place where the majority of the employees are working from. And if I have a company that I provide services or construction, then obviously I'm going to have the majority of my employees are going to be working in job sites. Nonetheless, I do have to have folks that are working out of the principal office. It's not sufficient for me in a service or construction company. It's not sufficient for me to have folks coming in, picking up work orders, and leaving and doing the majority of their work at job sites. Because the third bullet there, the other purpose, is that multiplier effect. We want to make sure that not only the employees are having more, having living wages, but also that that office, that location, that firm that is working out of this area has employees there that are going to be able to patronize the businesses around it. That's the most simplest way, right? Or it's going to be occupied where otherwise it was not occupied before. So it will start reducing the crime, maybe loitering, around. So this program was designed to really be an additional tool for economic development. Now, why would a company obtain the HUBZone certification? Because, there's a couple of requirements that we just talked about. The requirement of at least 35% of my employees must reside in a HUBZone, that I have to invest in this location, whether it is refurbishing it or buying it and securing it, et cetera. Why would I go through all that? And whenever I've had the opportunity to ask those questions of firms that have been very successful in the program, they tend to say these two things that we have there. It's a way of them giving back to the community, oftentimes the communities that they've come from, the owner has come from. And it's a way of providing employment to folks that they know, that they've were raised with, and the owner perhaps was able to leave the area, but maybe some of the members in his community did not, and so he or she wants to give back. It often aligns, oftentimes when you're talking with these firms, you will see that often aligns with the HUBZone program, the mission of the HUBZone program of improving the conditions of these impoverished communities. It often aligns with the mission of these companies, whether it's a very sophisticated robotics company, IT, construction. It often aligns to where they're coming from in terms of community involvement and goodwill. It also obviously is a business decision, and that's obviously none of us need to lose perspective of that. So it narrows the field of competition, obviously. If I am successful as a small business obtaining, being awarded contracts through small business set-asides, when I obtain the HUBZone certification, I'm going to be able to bid on HUBZone set-asides, which obviously there's going to be less firms in the portfolio versus the number of firms that do what I do in the small business at large portfolio. Now, we will talk a little bit later about the different contracting, but I will say right now is there are many ways of the hook, basically, in the purpose for this program, besides what we talked about, is, okay, we have this mission, but what is the enticement for industry to go through all this? It's because of contracting opportunities. And without the contracting opportunities, none of the purposes that we just went through can be obtained. So firms are looking at HUBZone set-asides that I just mentioned, when the contracting officer determines that there are two or more, at least two firms in the HUBZone portfolio. Right now the HUBZone portfolio is almost 5,000 firms of all makes. So if the contracting officer determines that there are two or more firms that can provide the services or the products that the federal government is seeking, they can set aside the solicitation, set aside for HUBZone. Sometimes you will see that there are sources sought that are set aside for HUBZone, and that is we recommend, as a matter of fact, and I encourage you to recommend when you're talking to acquisition personnel, recommend that if they're having difficulty meeting their HUBZone contracting numbers, because they have to allocate at least 3% of their contracting needs to go to HUBZone certified firms. And many of the federal agencies have had difficulty meet that goal. So one of the things that we recommend, and this comes from the other agencies that are doing very well on their HUBZone contracting goal, is that when they're doing their market analysis, and if their market analysis is going to include, they want to use a sources sought, to do the sources sought that is only for HUBZone firms. If an agency does a sources sought for all businesses or all small businesses, the net is cast too wide. And a HUBZone firm that perhaps could actually do the work maybe already be too busy doing other work and may not really invest the time in providing, because it costs money, to respond to sources sought. And they may not do that because they see the net cast too wide, and you will not get that response. So what we are always recommending is for them to learn from the agencies that are most successful in contracting with HUBZone firms. When they are incorporating the sources sought in their market analysis, they actually limit it to HUBZone firms, and that's when they really get a good number of responses. Now, if the agency only gets one response in that sources sought, and it's a HUBZone firm that is qualified, that can do the job, that can do the work that needs to be done, then the federal agency does have a justification to award that work under a sole source authority, which it is also part of the HUBZone regulations. So HUBZone sole source can be awarded when there's only one firm that can do the work, either because when the agency is doing their market analysis, only one firm responds, or when they go to the portfolio, when they go and they review and they see only one firm really seems to have the capabilities to do the work. So that's one mechanism. The other mechanism, obviously, is that HUBZone firms, in terms of when they bid on full and open competition, they can obtain a 10% price evaluation preference that is applied to the large firm. And we can go over that if need be during this conference. But I just wanted to mention why it narrows the field of competition, and that is really the incentive that firms have to obtain, to seek the certification, and to be operating and employing people in these HUBZones. Now, why would a city or a county, why would the Office of Economic Development incorporate or include this program as an additional tool in their strategic economic development plans? Well, as we just covered, it offers that additional incentive for firms to consider either relocating or opening an additional office there. And for example, we were talking about the principal office and that definition that where the majority of the employees are working from. Well, what happens is actually I, as a small business, could have more than one office, so long as the one that is in the HUBZone has more employees than my other offices. So if I'm approached by an economic development agency and maybe they have some ideas, they want to develop a particular IT corridor, maybe they have some incentives for me to locate in that area. I'm currently, my office is not in a HUBZone, but as I look into this other site, maybe I locate a particular piece of real estate that is very attractive, but I don't want to really move my headquarters. And remember, I'm mentioning headquarters because in the definition of principal office, the term headquarters is not included, and it is on purpose because, again, this is economic development. So what we want is we want more people working out of these offices that happen to be or warehouses or plants, right, that are in these HUBZones. So I could decide to keep my headquarters, which is not in a HUBZone, open up, a location in the HUBZone, and start hiring more people. As I have, obviously, I should have work that supports that, but I would start staffing that office in HUBZone. And then when I have the majority of the employees working out of that HUBZone location, and when I have overall, between both offices, all my employees, let's say that I have 100 employees for the ease of math, and I have 49 in my headquarters, and I have 51 now in the HUBZone location. Well, the principal office, I'm going to be able to meet principal office because I have more employees in that HUBZone location. Now, the residency requirement, that has a 35% residency requirement, I do have to count all 100 employees. So I will have to kind of go 100 times 35%, And at least I have to have at least 35 people that are residing in a HUBZone. But that obviously on that first bullet is these are the things that firms, sometimes they really don't understand that they can have multiple offices. And sometimes it may take them a little while to really be ready to apply for the HUBZone certification, because obviously staffing, refurbishing a place, staffing up an office so that it has more employees than the other, making sure that I have the residency requirement, all those things take time sometimes. We've had firms sometimes that they work for a couple of years on this, but it's certainly worthwhile. They have to find that it's worthwhile. So obviously this works very well when a community also has some incentives that they're providing to encourage industry to move in particular areas of their county or their city. Obviously, the second bullet is self-explanatory. It provides those employment opportunities to HUBZone residents. And there is a lot of potentials on the third bullet. We have seen very creative things developed by industry, working very closely with the workforce development centers, with educational institutions, forming very strong and very creative linkages between high schools, community colleges, and universities to not only provide employment opportunities to the graduates, but to develop internship opportunities. It enhances the educational experience for the folks that are attending these educational institutions in the HUBZones. So it really could be, it's something that has worked very, very well for many of the areas across the country. Obviously, it boils down to dollars, right? In FY15, there were over $6.4 billion, $6.4 billion awarded to HUBZone firms. Now, this was government-wide. But this is not even the 3%, okay? I believe in FY15, we were approximately, the federal government-wide achieved something like 1.8%. So we're all working very, very hard. Many federal agencies are working very hard in achieving their 3%. So it could be really a very valuable tool for a lot of our communities. Now, the last bullet is you really should look at the list of HUBZone certified firms. So by clicking on that link, you would find that the list of firms. Now, the list of firms, as I mentioned, is close to 5,000. So any caps in that database, it caps at 1,500. So I encourage you to search by state, search by county perhaps, search by industry, and to just so that you have the results coming up, and then you will see what type of industries are represented there, and if there's anything in that portfolio that could assist the work that you're doing. If you don't find the type of firms, industries, etc., that you believe would benefit your area or the work that you do, please reach out to us. You can either, at the end we have some contact information, but we have a help desk, which is HUBZone@sba.gov. That's HUB as in boy, Z as in zebra, ONE @sba.gov. And you can let us know, just tell us what you're hoping to achieve, and we will assist you in your efforts. We will work very closely with our district offices, our partners, to assist you. So here's what we were talking about. We covered already the first three bullets, the HUBZone set-asides, the sole source awards, those awards through full and open competition when there is an application of a 10% price evaluation preference. And then obviously there are subcontracting opportunities. The prime contractors are required also to meet subcontracting goals, HUBZone subcontracting goals. So you will see oftentimes, we see it here, firms that are seeking certification because their customer, which is a prime contractor, is asking them to explore this because they are falling short on their HUBZone goals. Now, how do the firms get and keep the HUBZone certification? Well, obviously, it's preparation. The more that they're prepared and understand the program, and you're certainly helping us in spreading the word, but the more they understand the requirements and the strategy that they need to develop to maintain the certification, the better off they will be. So we offer a variety of free resources in this office alone. Plus, of course, there's a whole array of a wonderful network of counselors in district offices, within the federal agencies, procurement technical assistance centers, the women business centers, the small business development centers. It's endless. I didn't have enough space in this slide to list all of the counselors that are around the country that understand and know the program. This office offers also, we offer office hours every Tuesday, every Thursday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's a good mechanism for firms to understand. And obviously, we have a lot of information on the website. But the more informed a firm is, the better off they're going to be, not only to apply, but more important, maintain the certification. The reason why I'm saying maintain the certification is because of these 2 out of the 4 requirements, regulatory requirements, relate to the principal office being in a HUBZone. And as we said earlier, that's the place where the majority of the employees have to be working from, or at least someone needs to be working out of there if I have, if I have service or contracting, or construction, firm. And the other one is that at least 35% of my employees must reside in a HUBZone. So what does my strategy look like as I'm looking into this program? What is it that I need to do to make sure that I don't fall out of compliance? Because there is no grace period, unfortunately. The statute or the regulation that govern this program, that does not provide for, neither of those 2 provide for kind of a grace period. If I fall below to 34%, can SBA give me 30 days to come up to compliance? There is no such thing, unfortunately. If my principal office is no longer in a HUBZone, the area is no longer a HUBZone, and I located another site, I'm going to keep this one, but I'm moving the majority of my employees to another site, but it's going to take me 3 months. Can SBA give me 3 months? Unfortunately not. So the strategy is looking ahead. Obviously, that 35%, what we see in the firms is they maintain it at a much higher level. We see firms going 50, 60%, so that if an employee leaves or an employee lives in an area that is expiring, is no longer going to be a HUBZone, it's not going to affect the residency. Same thing with the principal office. They know when this area is going to expire because the map actually tells them so. And so they interface a lot with the geographies and understand it. So they're developing strategies so that maybe they see that the area is changing, because you can always tell when an area is changing, and they see that there is an expiration 3 years from now. Well, they have 3 years, and maybe they have a lot of business 500 miles away. A lot of federal business is going on there, and they're performing on a lot of contracts there. Maybe it makes business sense for them to open up another office there, and over the next 2 years, 2.5 years, start staffing that office. So they really have time to really plan ahead. So the definitions, obviously, are very important. Besides the planning ahead is understanding the term of arts. So the firms must understand that the term employee, the term principal office, are not layman's terms. They have a regulatory meaning. And so the better folks understand what this means, the better off will be in terms of really when they're doing their calculations of the 35%, they're counting properly. When they're doing the calculation as to, do I have more employees in my principal office than on the other one, am I counting properly? Because if I'm miscounting the number of employees because maybe I didn't understand what an employee was or I didn't read the definition, then I'm going to either undercount or overcount, which is going to affect my math. So it's as simple as that sometimes. So obviously understanding that terms have a regulatory meaning And the employee is very, very definite meanings. Is someone really that works at least 40 hours a month, and but they're either on my payroll, or maybe I'm getting them from a temporary employee agency, or I'm leasing them, or I'm getting them through a union agreement, or I have a professional employer organization agreement, and I'm getting employees through that agreement. An owner will be counted as an employee if the owner, even if the owner doesn't get paid, the owner will be counted as an employee, so long as that owner works a minimum of 40 hours a month. Someone that I'm not paying to, maybe that person works 160 hours, but I'm not, they're working free. You know, they're just helping me out. That person will not be considered an employee. Now, if they're receiving, you know, if they're not receiving any compensation, basically, that's a volunteer. Now, on that second, you know, it says employee there, and then you have that says SBA will consider the totality of the circumstance. That's important to note, and there is a link in the frequently asked questions of the HUBZone website. There is a link to that SBA size policy statement #1, and a link to the IRS federal income tax kind of decision tree as to whether someone should be considered an employee or an independent contractor. The totality of the circumstance is important, and SBA uses it, and we explain it to folks in areas that are out of the ordinary. Most of the cases that come through either initial applications or continued eligibility reviews that we're doing, most of them are very simple. You know, all employees are listed in the payroll, and it's pretty straightforward. But there are some cases where folks are working for a firm that are not listed in the payroll, and it may be a gray area. So that's why it's important to note that we look at the entire package, at the entire either application package or the entire continual eligibility evaluation package to determine whether this person should or should not be an employee. And I'm more than happy to expand on that. Now, the principal office, again, depends on employees. So it's very, very important to know who to count. And as we talked earlier, if I'm in service or construction, I need to exclude from the principal office evaluation. I need to exclude those folks that are working in job sites. Only for the principal office evaluation. So remember that example I was giving you about 100 employees? Then when I was doing the 35% calculation, the residency calculation, I needed to count all the employees, all 100, regarding of where they're working. And basically when I'm looking at the residency, determining whether I meet that residency requirement, I'm looking at to where folks are sleeping at night, right? And when I'm looking at the principal office, I'm basically looking at to where they're working. So I may have a list and I see folks are working in job sites. I know that those are not going to be counted towards my evaluation of principal office. And obviously principal office requires more of an evaluation if I have more than one office, obviously. Okay. The other two eligibility requirements for initial application is that the firm obviously has to be small by relevant SBA standards, and they have to be at least 51% owned and controlled by U.S. citizens or a community development corporation, an agricultural, a cooperative, or an Indian tribe. I forgot to add here, I didn't place the Native Hawaiian organizations, and I need to make you aware that that is a change that occurred in October of last year, where a company applying for HUBZone certification can be owned by a Native Hawaiian organization, okay? That is fine. Now, the ownership, usually the majority of the applications that we get are individually owned, not entity owned. and I refer, entity-owned refers to that community development corporations or tribal governments or Alaskan Native corporations, Native Hawaiian organizations, et cetera. So the individually owned companies, they need to be directly owned. Okay, it has to be 51% directly owned by U.S. citizens. What that means is basically that if I have a corporation that is owned by me, I'm a citizen, I own my corporation 100%. I decide to organize a limited liability company, and I want that limited liability company to obtain HUBZone certification. Unfortunately, I am going to fail the ownership requirement because that limited liability company is actually owned by the corporation, okay? So be attentive to that. We've had a couple of cases where the company failed because it was owned by a corporation. It was owned by a holding company, okay? Now, the geographies, these are the designations, and we have several of them. And always think about them as layers, okay? So you could have an address of an employee or a principal office that really is, it qualifies under many designations. You know, I could have an address that is in a qualified census tract. It's also in a qualified non-metro county that happens to be a difficult development area, and it is in an Indian reservation. And it just happened to have been designated under a qualified disaster area. So that kind of like, that actually can happen, and it does happen. So be attentive to that. It becomes important because if the qualified census tract, when we're doing an evaluation, if the census tract is no longer qualified, SBA has to redesignate it for 3 additional years. And but if the county, the non-metro county underneath the census tract remains qualified, then it's okay. So you could have a situation where a client or an individual says, oh my God, my address is in a redesignated area. But look a little bit deeper, because it could be that the redesignated area, maybe I'm employing someone, and that person resides in an area that expires July 2017. And I go, well, that's okay. This is a good employee. I'm going to hire them, but I'm going to have to plan something to make sure that I have enough employees, because HUBZone employees, because eventually this employee is not going to reside in a HUBZone. Well, if I look a little bit deeper, I could determine if maybe the non-metro county happens to be qualified. So it doesn't matter that census tract is expiring in July, because yeah, it will expire, but guess what? The county remains qualified. So that's how tricky sometimes it gets, okay? Now here basically is a little bit of a table as to when these areas are updated. And they're kind of, most of them are a little bit predictable. You know, like the qualified census tracts are generated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they usually do it on an annual basis. Usually it's in the winter time. Well, it's actually between October and November or so. So it's in the fall, I guess, and they publish these in the Federal Register. And that happens every year. So we basically do the analysis and post updates early in the following year. So usually between January, February, we would post an update on census tracts. With the qualified non-metro counties, there are 3 types. They can be qualified under any of these 3 types. They can qualify under unemployment, and the data comes from BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics. It comes out annually, and that usually comes out around the springtime. So usually we publish the updates around the summer or so. The non-metro county can also qualify under income, and the data comes from the Census Bureau, actually the American Community Survey. That comes out kind of similar as the Qualified Census Tract. It comes out towards October, November, December, thereabouts. So we update the non-metro counties based on income. We update those earlier in the year, January, February, something like that. Now, if the non-metro county happens to be outside the continental USA, outside the 48, and it happens to be a difficult development area, they are also determined to be HUBZones. So those comes out also annually through HUD, and again, we publicize those between January and February. But remember that the difficult development areas for HUBZone are only those non-metro counties that are outside the 48. So that is Guam, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Alaska. I know I'm forgetting some, but basically outside. And the United States does have difficult development areas in all the states, well, most of them. But those will not be designated as HUBZone because the statute does not allow for that, okay? Qualified Indian land, that is as necessary, and it is whenever we get a notification from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or we get a notification from external parties that they say, you know, there is a new reservation that was just federally recognized, and so we make our research and we incorporate that geography into the database, into the maps. Same thing with base closures. If a military base is closed, it's the Department of Defense that let us know. We work very closely with them. And qualified disaster areas, obviously they're not predictable, and they will, we would obtain the information from our Office of Disaster Assistance, and then we would make the updates as soon as possible. Okay. HUBZone information is available. I mentioned the website. In here I listed all the different items that is in the website for you to refer to. There is a question that I'd like to handle right now. Is regarding the BRACs. Does a BRAC-related HUBZone area lose its designation as of the date certain, or does it also receive 3 years of grandfather treatment? Excellent question, Hugh. And since we're coming to an end, let me go back to this list. The redesignated areas only apply to the qualified census tracts, the non-metro counties, and the difficult development areas, okay? Those are the only ones that when they are no longer qualified based on the data that we receive from these agencies that I was mentioning, they get redesignated for 3 additional years from the date that they lost the designation. So we're doing right now we're finalizing the evaluations on census tracts. And so those census tracts that did not qualify, they did not meet the criteria, we are going to tack on 3 more years. So we're on the 2017, so these will be expiring in 2020 unless they become newly qualified, you know, but that's basically the rule of thumb. So the other areas, Indian reservations, the BRACs, qualified disaster areas, are not subject to redesignation. Okay, I hope I answered that question. Okay, here are all the links that take you to the website, to the different resources there. And in here we place the information on how to contact us. By all means, don't hesitate in reaching out to us, either to schedule a meeting, we usually do it remotely because that is a lot more effective, cost effective, but we're more than happy to assist you in any way that you need to. Right now I don't believe we have questions, but let me show you. Can you give a concrete example? Oh, there is one. Can you give a concrete example of how this type of certificate has helped the company? Sure, definitely. There are actually many, but it's usually companies that the companies that do very well as prime contractors in the federal contracting arena, not subcontractors. I'm going to focus more on the prime contractors, are companies that are going to have, that are going to be a little bit more mature, okay? So they are companies that have perhaps 8 to 10 employees, been around maybe for 10 years or more, have average gross revenues of maybe a couple of $1 million or thereabouts. Those are the ones that do very well in the program because they have the resources to bid and be awarded HUBZone contracts as primes. Now, there are a lot of regulatory changes that have occurred that would help the smaller companies be able to joint venture, perhaps, and go at it together for HUBZone contracts. But, for example, there is a company in Fredericksburg, Virginia, that I had the pleasure of meeting the owner a long time ago, and the company located there years ago to qualify census tract, and over the years they built up their company through HUBZone set-asides, but also other contracts. It was not purely HUBZone, but they built up their company in such a way that they eventually ended up opening another office in Oakland, California, so that when their census tract in Fredericksburg, Virginia would expire, because they could see that things were changing for the better in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and eventually that area was going to become redesignated. So they wanted to prepare to maintain the certification. And that company was able to do so because they had enough business in other areas that had a lot of other HUBZones, and it made sense for them to actually locate another office clear across the country. There was another company that voluntarily decertified, and it was a nice voluntary decertification for us because they voluntarily decertified because they became other than small. They became a very successful HUBZone firm, and not so much because they were getting a lot of contracts. I know this is counterintuitive, but what they said to me is that, well, we got a few HUBZone contracts, but most important, the HUBZone program opened doors to us. We were able to access conversations and work with people that otherwise the conversation would not have even started if it had not been for our commitment to the program and what we were doing in our community. And the company eventually was an engineering firm, eventually was purchased by this very large firm, and that's how they became, other than small. So I'm hoping that I'm giving you some information, but these are kind of the two of them that I'm remembering. Now, the other questions that are coming in, and we have a couple of more minutes only. How long are we currently running in time for new applications to be processed? In fiscal year 16, the average processing time was 79 days. That's from excluding the time where we're waiting for documents or we're waiting for information from the firms. I don't have the current numbers yet, but that's what was happening in FY16. The next question is, we have, are funding amounts less in other states such as in Arizona for this program? I think that this question relates to contracting opportunities. Because remember, this is not a grant, so we are not providing funding or grants to the firms or to economic development agencies. This is firms seeking contracts. So I really don't have the answer to that. We will need to do an analysis. But basically, Arizona does have buying activities, meaning federal agencies that are issuing HUBZone contracts. But it all depends, obviously, in the presence of federal or military activities. Like if you have a base in an area, obviously there's going to be more contracting opportunities in those areas than in other areas where it might not. Now, you may have the need as a federal agency to contract with companies, HUBZone companies that are going to be fighting fires. And so it doesn't mean that the work would be performed right where the organization is, where the place is. It could be that it's being performed out in the woods, of course. I know that we've come to the end, and what are the changes to HUBZone certification? I don't understand what the question is. I'm so sorry about that. But again, if you could send that question to HUBZone@sba.gov, we will make sure to answer it because I don't quite understand what are the changes to HUBZone certification, what that connects to. Thank you so much for the time that you took today, and I hope that you learned something new. And please keep in touch. We'd love to help your efforts. Take care. Bye-bye.